It's Friday night, which means it's time for another episode of the Friday Night Nicktoons podcast. I'm Ashli.
And I'm Casey. Last time, as in just before this podcast, if you're listening to them in order, we watched the 10th episode of Avatar: The Last Airbender.
And as we said, this is a double episode week, and we are sort of honoring the amazing, brilliant show of SpongeBob SquarePants due to the unfortunate passing of its creator, Stephen Hillenburg.
Yeah, this really bummed us out, as we said on the last episode, and it has been really beautiful to see this like small but mighty Nicktoons community coming together. Patricia and Aaron reached out to us, and I'm seeing lots of tweets in support, and it's just really awful all around. But ALS is so terrible that in a way it's he didn't have to go through it for too long. But ultimately this episode is about the show. That he sort of notoriously hated making things about him ever. He really was just this animation geek who happened to create a $1 billion show. He wouldn't do many interviews. He wasn't really the face of the show. You'd see his name. I remember seeing it growing up, just like Butch Hartman and Guy Moon. I would see the names, be like, I wonder who those guys are. And of course, once you grow up, you learn more about it. And I guess he had a history in marine biology, either as a student or a professional. Really cool that he was able to put that passion into the show. And of course, as we learned, he was a writer on Rocko's Modern Life too, so that can't be forgotten, where he presumably met Tom Kenny and used him for SpongeBob.
Yeah, it's seriously an amazing story to end up in this wild show that we have today. And I am just so glad that he was able to, with his time here, to make something as impactful as it is. Again, I know a lot of times we kind of see SpongeBob as this fun, light-hearted comedy, and it is, but it's so much more than that. It really is just a part of our culture, I think, honestly.
For sure, and I'm glad he got to see the movies be made and see the musical. The director of the musical, Tina Landau, tweeted out shortly after he passed a really sweet message saying, thanks for letting me step into Bikini Bottom or something like that. Just so much. The show spawned so much creativity and collaboration, and honestly, Ashli, without SpongeBob, I don't think we'd be making this. This was the show that got us really into Nicktoons, both as kids and in high school, when we were sort of reconnecting with that part of our lives.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree. I know we're not as ridiculously SpongeBob biased as we might have been, but this is a big show. And I mean, in our original Nicktoons Madness, right, it was the winner amongst the shows, so we know that you guys obviously, its popularity is wild and amazing. And but yeah, he didn't write a whole ton of episodes, but he did write this one, so I think that'll be a good little piece for us to really delve into something that he was especially a part of, and I love this episode personally.
And he storyboarded a decent amount of the show too, which is really cool. I don't know how many show creators do that. I truly don't. I'm kind of ignorant when it comes to, as we've said, we're not animators. We're not really in the industry, but it's an amazing show. He created such a quirky, beautiful world that has really endured through many generations. I know my parents actually enjoyed watching it. In fact, we got cable when I was maybe 8 or 9, so I was a PBS kid until then, and I remember the first thing I did was flip on Nickelodeon, and it was the Suds episode was playing of SpongeBob, and it's not even the greatest episode in the world, but it will always have such a special place for me because it was on when I realized that I could watch SpongeBob and I didn't have to go to a friend's house.
Yeah, and I think we all just have fond memories, right, of watching the show. So many quotes, too, that, anybody around our age, I can quote so many lines from SpongeBob and, no questions asked. Everyone knows the context. It's huge. It just is.
And I sent this to you, Ashley, but I saw this heartbreaking image that it was a 4-panel type thing, and it was when Squidward's floating in the bubble, but someone had photoshopped Stephen Hillenburg into the bubble, and SpongeBob and Patrick are saying, you know, up, 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 how high is he gonna go? They say off to the great beyond, and the last panel is just the two of them saying, so long, friend, and happy trails. It just broke my heart. It's such a beautiful thought.
It really is. And I'm sure this is hitting a lot of us in a lot of ways. And, you know, it's somewhat more expected because, you know, we've known that he's had ALS for a bit now, but it's still always surprising, and he was still pretty young. So I'm sure it's hitting a lot of us in a lot of different ways, but hopefully this can sort of help us reflect back on the positives that he was able to bring to us. So, without further delay, be sure to follow us on Twitter at FNN_podcast and Facebook.com/FNN podcast, and review us on Apple Podcasts so that others can find the show. Also, be sure to check out our new YouTube page as well.
Thank you guys so much for tuning in, again, twice in 1 week. Now let's get started.
From the Nicktoons Animation Studio in Hollywood.
Alright, like we said, this one's from Spongebob, entitled Bubblestand. It's Season 1, Episode 2A, and originally aired July 17th, 1999. We're going way back.
And we've covered up to this episode because we did all 3 of the first episode. It's the only 3-part SpongeBob, so we could just keep going, make this an Avatar SpongeBob back and forth. But in this one, SpongeBob builds and opens a stand for blowing bubbles, much to Squidward's dismay. And right off the bat, I just want to say I'm realizing how much this episode helped set the tone of the show. Because in the first 3 episodes, we don't see that much of SpongeBob's little neighborhood. It's at the Krusty Krab. It's, I guess there's the Reef Blower one we get that introduces us to the concept of his relationship with Squidward, but this is the first time that we really see SpongeBob, Squidward, and Patrick all guns ablaze.
Yes, it's wonderful. It's also the first sort of insight into this bubble blowing thing, right? Like, what a concept. They're underwater, but for some reason, Patrick and SpongeBob's, like, one of their biggest hobbies is blowing bubbles. And it's just another one of those funny things, right? That, like, just 'cause, right? And I love the little quirks of this show, right? Like, he's a sponge who works as a fry cook and likes to blow bubbles and has a pet snail. It's just like all these random little bits and pieces that feel so instrumental to the show. And I love that this is sort of the introduction to it, is SpongeBob, who's really not much of an entrepreneur other than in, you know, Chocolate with Nuts, setting up this stand to have people come to pay to blow bubbles. Everything about that is just so beautiful to me.
Yeah, it's similar to jellyfishing, where it's one of those things, it's like, oh, they live underwater. Of course that's a hobby they have. Like, yeah, you're right. It's part of the world that we take for granted. It's like, oh, of course they love blowing bubbles in SpongeBob, but it's like they're underwater. How do they even blow bubbles?
The whole concept of it is so funny, and you know that they somehow have this ability to blow bubbles into really, really cool shapes.
They're kind of like
I was
smoke
so jealous.
rings almost. Like Gandalf.
SpongeBob was the original Vape Lord, is that what you're saying?
Exactly.
Totally messing. But no, we also sort of get a great earful in the beginning of Squidward's not very great clarinet playing, and we get this great sort of zoom in on SpongeBob's face where he's like contemplating whether or not he wants to go back to building the stand again because he knows that it's bothering Squidward, and he goes ahead and does it anyways, and it's just great.
So classic. And yeah, Patrick comes up and he wants to blow a bubble and he doesn't have a quarter, so SpongeBob lends him a quarter, which he then pays SpongeBob with, and then SpongeBob, like, tests the quarter to see if it's counterfeit.
Which, God, everything about that interaction is beautiful, right? Like, hey, Sponge, do you have a quarter I could borrow? Like, it's his stand, right? That whole interaction is so them, right? Like, he could just be like, oh, it's free, but no.
Yeah.
He wants to pay for it, right? Like,
Well,
Patrick wants to be a good customer here.
And it establishes so much about both of their characters. Like, Patrick is a freeloader. SpongeBob is very giving, but he's also a rule follower, right?
Yes.
So he could just make it free, but nope, it costs 25 cents, so he has to give Patrick the quarter, who then gives it back. It's just, that's what's so great about the comedy in SpongeBob, is it's all caricature writing. Like, they don't just make jokes to make jokes. It's all very specifically their characters.
It really is, and yeah, this is sort of our first insight, and it's another one of those moments that we talk about that's really, really great, especially in the beginnings of this show, are that Patrick is stupid, but in, like, a great way, right? Like, the idea of him, and he's kind of so innocently stupid, too, right? Like, him wanting to pay this quarter just because it's so cute. He goes on to struggle, and then there's a couple of times where this happens, where SpongeBob conveniently has these little paper signs ready to go for the right moment, and this one is lessons 25 cents, which, you know, which is now where we get what's got to be amongst one of the more iconic sort of moments in, honestly, maybe in the whole series even, is the technique scene.
Yeah, SpongeBob's bubble blowing lesson is immaculate. Technique, 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 technique. You already know it. Bring it around town. Like, we don't need to tell you guys. Like, this is the
Step on
iconic.
your right foot.
Yeah.
Don't forget it. Like,
it.
everything. It's beautiful. It's and this too, like the originality of this show, and I don't even know how exactly to put it, but it has a lot of random elements that feel like they make sense.
Yes.
Right? Like, the show doesn't do, like, oh, it's so random, there's a bubble blowing technique. Like, it feels like that is just a part of this universe, and it makes all the sense in the world that SpongeBob knows this amazing bubble blowing technique, and that it works, right? Like, that just feels right.
Yeah, it's a show that doesn't try too hard to be quirky, or at least it didn't. I don't want to disparage the show while we're sort of eulogizing the creator, but, you know, what it's become is a little more what we're talking about. But back in the originals, it really was about, this organic world, and it's weird, but they're pieces that fit together so nicely, it feels less weird. And there, just real quick, there's this great moment when Patrick gives SpongeBob the quarter, paying him essentially, and Squidward just goes, "Business is booming." I almost wish he didn't laugh to himself after, but the character demands it. Like, Squidward does laugh at his own jokes. It would be funnier if he didn't, but that's what Squidward is, and that's funny that he laughs at his own joke.
Yeah, it's so good. It's so good. And just, again, Squidward sort of being the grumpy man that he is, and you know, you kind of feel for him almost, right? Like, he's so lonely that he's laughing at his own jokes. But
right.
We do get, and it's a little bit later, so SpongeBob, you know, blows a bunch of awesome bubbles, including the classic, "It's a giraffe," when it's clearly an elephant.
Which not only is iconic for that, but then the sheer length of Patrick's laugh afterwards.
Oh my god. It's gotta be like a good 40 seconds.
Just constant as it floats and floats and floats. And also when one of the bubbles pops, it's like a boat horn. It's just really excellent. Like, only to irritate Squidward is it a boat horn. Yes.
And it, you know, messes up his whole house.
Yeah. This is a lot like the Secret Box episode, too.
Yeah, and this is kind of a common theme, right? So we get then Squidward comes up there and he's complaining about it, and then we get the second little sign where it's a closed sign that SpongeBob is all prepped to have, And we get this sort of classic thing, though, that SpongeBob then walks away from the stand, and he's basically like, you guys are childish, and this is stupid, and whatever. And then as soon as they're gone, or at least he thinks that they're gone, he, goes in for the bubble wand. And we see this a couple of times, right? We see it with the box episode. We see it with the one with the wrapper, the piece of paper that he gets obsessed with after watching SpongeBob play with it. This thing where he's like, no, I'm too cool for your guys' stupid antics. But he really does want to do them.
Yeah, he always gets caught up in it, which I find very relatable. It'll be kind of like I remember with Fortnite kind of being like, what is this game? Like, okay, it's free to download, whatever, I'll try it. And now I'm like 150 hours in, and I've kind of stopped playing now, but I was totally Squidward. Or like there's the claw machine too, remember that one? It's a little later. But there's like a claw machine that SpongeBob is trying to win, and Squidward's like, why would you ever do this? Like, watch, let me show you. And then he gets addicted to it. Yeah.
Or Krabby Patties, right? And just one bite, too.
Yeah, Squidward clearly has an addictive personality. That sort of just hit me.
Yeah, and he very much likes to think that he's, like, too cool for things, but he's a child at heart, too. Mm-hmm. And I think we also all kind of go through that, at least some of us, when you're in your teens and it's not cool to like things that aren't cool, and you don't want to seem like you're not doing the cool things, but like part of us, I feel like, is always going to be inclined to do things that are just fun,
Totally.
And I do think that it's a relatable sort of series of events here, and yeah, but Squidward struggles. He struggles a lot with this bubble blowing thing here.
Yeah, he's like trying to play it like a clarinet almost. He's got like an embouchure. Like, it's really, you just gotta blow, but he's like spitting and but what's great, getting to the end, is how just through his sheer rage and yelling, he builds the perfect bubble. Very similar, again, to the art episode where he smashes all the sculptures together and, you, sir, are the greatest artist who ever lived.
So I do think it's important to mention that, although mockingly, he does use the technique prior to this amazing bubble, right?
That's true, yeah. He like, kind of, like, wings it. He's like, okay, then I do blah, 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 step on the right foot, don't forget it, like, mocking it.
Yeah, like, bring it around town. But, like, we can't say that it doesn't work,
That's very true. Another set of ridiculous rules in this universe, but they're consistent.
And it's great. Also, I mean, I didn't count the total number of quarters, but, like, Squidward keeps paying a quarter every time, right? Because SpongeBob magically shows up as soon as he goes to blow it, and it's a whole thing. I just love that whole deal. But then, yeah, unfortunately, the bubble catches the entirety of Squidward's house. And it's one of those, which I do want to say, too, while this is happening and Squidward's really unaware of it, he's feeling really, really good about this bubble he just blew, and he plays clarinet again, and it's much better than at the beginning, right? And I think it's partially just he has this confidence boost. He's feeling really good about himself, but he's getting into it, and it's not bad.
Yeah, and I will say, like, as, I guess, a professional musician now, I was not when we started this podcast, but that's a thing, I guess. I will say, like, when you get an ego boost in any way, you just play better. And that's why I think a lot of the greatest, like, conductors and music directors are so positive, is because they'll bring out good performances. Like, if you're about to start a piece and you're like, oh, meet so-and-so, my whatever player, he's, like, one of the greatest clarinet players I've ever met. Like, they're gonna play better if you say something like that. And so in this situation, it's Squidward successfully blowing a bubble, and I gotta say, that happens to me too. Like, if I beat a difficult video game and then I have a gig, like, I usually do better. It's super weird.
Yeah, but it's well done. It's a subtle little thing here too, right? It's the little details that I think just really add up to make the show great. And the bubble eventually bursts and he falls back, and he goes back to being squeaky again. He goes back to feeling Like, his bubble has been burst, you know?
Well, it's similar to his artwork. Some of it isn't bad. Like, Squidward does have some talent. He's not a total hack, and that's what makes him, I think, a really tragic character, is he's just not quite good enough at anything.
No, yeah. He's one of those, jack of all trades, master of none sort of a situation. And I think also just the people that he spends his time around aren't really, like, SpongeBob doesn't know what art is. Like, I'm sure he'd be supportive, but he doesn't really care one way or another. But
he's kind of like Michael Scott in The Office, like with Pam and her, the painting that everyone ignores, and then he calls it like the greatest thing he's ever seen, and she like cries. SpongeBob really is a lot like Michael Scott.
Yeah. Best of intentions, sort of not fully understanding every situation.
Yeah, not the best social skills, but they sure do try.
Yeah. But man, this is such a good episode. It's such a good show. I felt so nostalgic watching this again. It's been a while, and man, I really do think that this is a good one to sort of wrap up everything and feel all of the feels all at once. It is sad that, and I guess in a sense it's not the end of the show, but it's it's a big loss for like our childhood, for the world of animation, and it's just a bummer. It was way before his time, and it's unsettling when someone who created something you love so much is no longer around. It doesn't even make sense. Yeah, and I mean, I am glad that we still have access to what he created, and that we still have the ability to experience it, and I can say after however many years now that it lives up. It really does. It is not just a kid's show. It is so much more, and there's a reason that this show became as popular as it did, and it's not just because they made some good jokes, right? It's so good. It's, and we will obviously still continue to cover the show as we do whenever it pops up. But I'm glad that we had a chance to sort of revisit this again, and this was definitely, I feel like, the perfect episode to do it with.
I agree. Good call. This was all you. We had a Doug episode queued up, but we're going to move that to the end of the year when we were going to do a SpongeBob episode. So we'll get to Survival of the Idiots eventually, but we thought this was more appropriate.
Yeah, and again, this is one of the ones that he actually wrote, so not that he stopped being a part of the show later, but, it was, I feel like it's a little more personal, and again, just those earlier episodes had so much, in a sense, world building to do, right? And the way that so many of these bits and pieces were just seamlessly dropped into our laps and, built out the SpongeBob universe, and all of the fun and laughter and amazing times that the show has brought me. I cannot be thankful enough.
I agree. Yeah, so hopefully we're able to give you guys at least a little bit more closure about this, or if anything, just remind you how much you love this show, because we're sure you do if you're listening to this.
All right, is there anything else that you want to add, or?
I don't think so. Why don't we head to our conclusion?
Sounds good. All right, you guys, we're not going to do a Twitter poll for this one this week. We do have our Avatar Twitter poll, so we figured we're just going to keep it at that. But be sure to still check out that first poll and give your answers to that one.
And next week we'll be back to Avatar with our 11th episode, so look forward to that.
And again, be sure to follow us on social media. We've got a Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Apple Podcasts. Find us on all of the above.
All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for listening. We're glad we were able to get these 2 episodes out to you, and we'll be back to our regular 1-a-week schedule starting next week. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll see you then.